Growing up with the PlayStation 2, there were many great first-party titles released for the console. These games included God of War, Final Fantasy, Persona, Ratchet & Clank, Jak and Daxter, Crash Bandicoot, and much more. But one game stood out for me personally. A game that had a style and uniqueness to it that hasn't been seen in a game up to this point. This game being Sly Cooper. Sly Cooper is a 3D platformer and one of the big three back in the PS2 era. It had a mission-based approach in hub world levels where there are elements of stealth involved. Now, I'm not going to be covering gameplay, story, music, and such in this video, as I'm sure most of you who are watching this are very well familiar with the series. Instead, in this video, I want to discuss why the likelihood of a new Sly game, although it would excite me, is likely not possible in 2026 and for the foreseeable future. I'm going to lay down some reasons as to why that is the case and what issues stand in the way of the series. Quick disclaimer, some points are opinionated, so feel free to disagree with me in the comment section so we can have a discussion. And without further ado, let's get started with the video. By the end of Sly 3, Sly's story appears to have come to a proper end. All of our main characters seem to have fulfilling arcs that are completed. Sly fakes amnesia and ultimately gets what he truly desires, this being a life with Carmelita. Bentley builds a time machine with Penelope and inherits the Thievius Raccoonus, and Murray completes his final training with the Guru and is now a professional pro racer. Similarly, Dimitri, the Guru, and Panda King also receive happy endings. Not that type of happy ending. The story of Sly is essentially complete, so although I love Sly Cooper, I don't think there could or even necessarily should be a sequel. As cliche as it sounds, all good things must come to an end. It feels like Sucker Punch had a vision in their mind for what Sly's story would be, and ultimately they delivered on it with the trilogy. This is why they later moved on to Infamous and now the Ghost series. In their eyes, the story of Sly Cooper is finished, at least for now. Now, as a diehard Sly fan, I always wanted the series to make a return, but after analyzing the ending of Sly 3 and Sucker Punch's stance on the series as a whole, I think it's best that the Sly series ends with Sly 3 as it leaves off on a high note. There are a few other reasons why the series can't make a return as well, in my opinion. For starters, the obvious one is Thieves in Time. Thieves in Time caused a lot of issues with the series continuity. At the end of Honor Among Thieves, Sly gives up thieving to build a life with Carmelita. This is a big sacrifice as he leaves behind his family's legacy, but ultimately views a life with her as more valuable. So him returning in a new Sly game would have to be something major, as he would be throwing away everything that led up to this point. The premise seems good on paper, as the pages of the Thievius Raccoonus are disappearing. Paper, pun intended. But when we get the actual reason from Sly, it's, and I quote,
"The old itch came back."
It's almost as if Sanzaru Games didn't even play the original game and just spat on the previous ending. Sly could have just said that they needed to protect the Thievius Raccoonus, since it's all that remains of his family's legacy, but instead Sly is like a crack addict after sobering up looking for his next fix. The story of Thieves in Time is also written poorly in general. I especially hated the twist of Penelope being a villain. It was completely out of left field and made no sense. If we take Thieves in Time as canon, which I implore any Sly fan to not do, then this would imply that Penelope is bad all along when was playing the long con. Even her motivations are stupid, as she wants to sell weapons to criminals to make money. This is extremely stupid, as Sly left behind his cane and ultimately the riches of the Cooper Vault for the gang. So money shouldn't even be an issue here. Is she that down bad for some schmeckles? What about her friendship and relationship? Sanzaru did a poor job here, as it ruined a once beloved character in my eyes. The one positive of Thieves in Time is that the game isn't titled Sly 4. I feel like Sanzaru did this so that whether the game did poorly or not, they could backpedal on it being a spin-off or a retcon game. It's like having your cake and eating it too. If the game does well, then it's titled Thieves in Time, but technically known as Sly 4. But if the game does poorly, since it isn't a numbered entry in the series, we the fans are left to speculate if it's canon or not. And this takes the pressure off of Sanzaru. Thieves in Time also ends with Sly being stuck in Egypt, which would make the job of any would-be developer who wants to revive the series difficult. Do they continue from the events of Thieves in Time, or create a new game that sort of starts from where Sly 3 ends, which wouldn't bode well since the story is basically complete. So to summarize the first point, Sly's story is complete, and continuing from where it ended feels wrong. The only real option is to acknowledge Thieves in Time's ending as canon and add a fifth entry to the series based off that, but I'd rather wipe my arsenal with sandpaper. The next point would be Sucker Punch, Sony, and their main focus. Sony, specifically the gaming division, is no longer interested in action platformers or new lighthearted IPs. Sony's goals are story-driven narrative games that play out like movies. They are after big blockbuster games like Spider-Man, The Last of Us, and so on. We've seen countless IPs banished to the Shadow Realm because of Sony's new fixation on these new types of games. Hot take here, but games like Spider-Man, Last of Us are slop games in my opinion. You walk around from cutscene to cutscene and occasionally press a button once or twice, and it's as if you are watching a movie rather than playing a game. These games have their place, but in my opinion, the industry has pushed hard for these, and Sony is a prime example, whereas other titles are pushed to the side and left to rot. Sucker Punch is under Sony and followed suit and created Ghost of Tsushima. As of this video, Ghost of Tsushima and Ghost of Yote are their highest earning games in terms of revenue. In a recent interview with one of the heads of Sucker Punch, he was asked what percentage of staff would want to work on a new Sly Cooper game, to which he stated around 10%. Sony's push for story-driven games and the majority of Sucker Punch Studio not wanting to work on a Sly game is yet another reason why we won't likely receive another entry in the series. Sony thinks action platformers are a waste of time since they could make way more money with big blockbuster movie narrative games like The Slop of Us. This is funny when you stop to consider that Astrobot, an action platformer, won Game of the Year back in 2024. This clearly shows that there is a strong demand for platformers as there are fans who grew up with these genres. The next logical conclusion would be to maybe get Sanzaru Games to develop Sly 5, but even that isn't possible as they have been since absorbed by Meta back in 2019. They have been relegated to a VR company since. In my opinion, Thieves in Time should have not existed, at least not as a continuation of the trilogy. In Sly 3, there were conclusions to each character's arc and a natural progression and an ending that felt complete. Sly 4 wouldn't have been so bad since the premise was okay. The Thievius Raccoonus pages disappearing gives a valid reason for Sly to return to thievery, but the ending where he is stuck in Egypt is the nail in the coffin. It could have maybe tried to conclude like Sly 3, but I think the reason they left a cliffhanger was to leave room for a possible sequel down the line. We know now with hindsight years later that never came to fruition, so we are at a crossroads. Are we okay with Sly 3 concluding the story and never receiving a new Sly game, or do we acknowledge Thieves in Time's existence and play off of that ending? We are in quite the pickle. Having hindsight now all these years later, what should have happened is that a new Sly Cooper game would be released, but it would follow a descendant of Sly in the future as his story is complete, and this new story would allow them to mess around with time travel or whatever else they wanted to without spitting in the previous game's endings. This would have balanced that itch for a new Sly game without ruining the previous entry story. And since this new character is a descendant of Sly, it still keeps and respects the original trilogy while defining its own unique characteristics and gimmicks. Imagine a Sly game with the graphical fidelity of Rift Apart. This would be very cool as they wouldn't need to keep dragging Sly back in, but instead could create a new story. These are just my ideas, so I'm just spitballing here. But to summarize the key points of why I think a new Sly game is unlikely, the first point is Sly's story is basically complete. The second one is that Thieves in Time caused a lot of issues for the series continuity. The third is that Sony isn't interested in 3D platformers and only big blockbuster movie games. And the fourth is that Sucker Punch has their hands full with Ghost and Sanzaru Games fell off the face of the earth. But that about concludes what I wanted to discuss today. What do you guys think? Should there be a new Sly game? Should it continue from Thieves in Time or follow a descendant of Sly and be its own spin-off? Let me know if you guys agree or disagree. I'm always interested to hear what you guys have to say. Also, real quick, if you made it this far into the video, thank you guys for your support in my most recent videos. It means a lot to me to see you guys enjoy them as much as I enjoy making them. If you like this video, consider subscribing or dropping a like, or if you didn't like it, leave a dislike and let me know why. And with that, I will catch you all on the flip side. Peace.